Thank you, Professor Lee, for the very inspiring remark. Indeed, one of the biggest strengths of design is turn challenges into opportunities. So in the era of AI, there are so many questions we as designers, also as design educators, have to ask. For instance, what should be the way of cooperation between human and AI? How could AI alter human and human or human-machine interactions? What would be or should be the relationship between us with AI? How can we actually trust AI? So how could we ensure AI could frame a problematic situation appropriately? I mean, maybe in a human-preferred way, or maybe not. If we consider AI as a tool, what are the challenges under the current industrial context? What could be the opportunities for designers then? So if you have so many questions as I do, that's fantastic. At the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button. You're welcome to submit the questions to our speakers and moderators, which is me, at any time during the event. So at the end of the event, there will be a Q&A session where we will visit as many of the submitted questions as time allows. Okay, so all the speakers and I will come back in the panel discussion later, which will be quite insightful. So don't go away, stay with us. So next, I want to welcome our first speaker, Professor Jodi FORLIZZI. So Professor FORLIZZI is the Geschke director and the professor in the Human Computing Interaction Institute at the Carnegie Mellon University. So her current research interests include designing services in the form of educational games, assistive robots, social agents, and healthcare services. She's interested in the intersection of algorithms and human service delivery. So let's welcome Professor Jodi FORLIZZI.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. I'm sorry we can't be together, but I am very happy to be here. I hope you can all see my screen. So by way of introduction, as you heard, I am the Geschke director and a professor in the HCI Institute at Carnegie Mellon University, and I conduct research and practice at the intersection of design and technology. And I focus on service design, design for healthcare, human-robot interaction, and educational games. I was the first designer hired in the School of Computer Science at CMU, and I did a lot of work on legitimizing design research within the technical fields and why it's different from, but equally as important as, scientific research. But today, what I want to do is speculate a little bit more on my core discipline of design and where it's going. I want to start by reflecting on a story I heard recently at a conference where a designer talked about how he solved the drinking water problem, the problem of bringing fresh water to people worldwide. It's true, designers are now working in education, public policy, healthcare, and other domains, and the scope of what designers do has broadened greatly in the past 2 decades. At the same time, I've been writing a book about the changes in the field of design and really thinking about the discipline. And I've been asking, what have I done in my career that's really about the discipline of design? And by experience and association, where can we have an impact as a field? Or simply put, what do designers really do? Or as Harold Nelson says, what the hell is design? So this is a speculative talk, and it's incomplete, and it probably has as many questions as it has answers. So I want to set the context a little bit for design today. Our world is changing. In the past decade, many dire societal problems have arisen, including the global aging of our population and climate change due to increasing amounts of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Society is fractioning as people fail to hear environmental warning signs or consider the needs of current and future generations. These problems are not simple problems. They are systems of problems, or what Herbert Simon called wicked problems, or Russell Ackoff deemed messes. The world is also witnessing the emergence of a new economic reality. The American economy, until the pandemic, had continued to grow steadily, but how the wealth is created and who creates it has changed drastically. This graphic from the recent New York Times article showed that a number of economic indicators are problematic, including employment rates, per capita income, and GDP. International production and trade has changed how we produce things. In the 1950s, almost all the cars on the road in the United States were made by American companies. And this is no longer the case. The most popular car in the US is now the Toyota Camry. But in many cases, components of foreign cars are made in the United States and shipped to other countries. Today, every major automobile manufacturer creates parts or assembles vehicles in a number of countries. A number of manufacturers have merged across the borders of nations, and this is also the case with other companies, including technology companies. We're also seeing a shift from manufacturing to a focus on service delivery. This graphic in the New York Times showed that how in 1960, the largest, most profitable companies in the US were goods producing companies, companies like GM, Esso, and ITT. But around 2010, we saw a sea change. And at that time, the largest, most productive companies in the US were companies that delivered services, companies like Walmart, Target, Kelly, and IBM. And even though these companies are providing commodities to customers, they position themselves as a service offering to get customers the products they need. And with the production of consumer goods on the decline, services targeted to particular purposes, what Ezio Manzini calls systems of interlinking services, continue to grow. And many of these services rely on products and smart products that are informed by data streams as touch points in a service delivery system. At the same time, we are facing a sea change in technology. From the personal computer to the invention of the internet, from the development of cloud computing to smartphone technology, from the invention of continuous sensing to wearable computing, and from 3D printing to augmented and virtual reality, technology has evolved at a rapid pace. And in general, people have benefited greatly from this. For example, email, blogs, and online document services has drastically increased and speeded communication between people. Ride-sharing services like Uber and Lyft enable mobility, and they connect riders and drivers faster and more cheaply. A revolution is taking place in healthcare as patients are now empowered to learn about and manage their health. And online education has advanced the field, particularly recently, enabling more people to learn in diverse contexts. So it's easy to see that technology empowers innovation in many areas, changing product strategy, development, and distribution. Recently, writers at The Economist decreed that data in this century is what oil is to the last one. It's true. Data has enabled new products, services, businesses, and even economies. Machine learning and AI play a role here in developing products, services, and systems behaving in a way that's considered smart. Today, machine learning and AI affect so many aspects of designers' touch, ranging from web-based services to conversational UIs to social media platforms and learning systems. Sadly, we also seem to be living in an increasingly uncivil community. From presidential politics to random internet comments, there seems to be more and more rude, demeaning, insulting, and aggressive language and behavior in our society. Research on the topic of incivility has found that mental and physical health and worker productivity and employee retention, customer relations, and so forth all suffer when work and social environments are uncivil. And there is social contagion with incivility in that if uncivil behavior occurs and is not confronted by corrective feedback or consequences, it tends to be more readily repeated and spreads to others. So design thinking is an approach that has been used for innovating solutions to these kinds of problems and responding to these changes in society. A quick search of the internet shows many definitions, including a process for creative problem solving, a design methodology that provides a solution-based approach to solving problems, and applying the principles of design to the way people work. Design thinking has historic precedents, and I wanted to touch on each of these because they each reflect the social, economic, and technological context that they were developed in. As design changed, so did how people conceptualized and worked with design. So Raymond Loewy's Maya principle, the most advanced yet acceptable, expressed that product designs are bounded by functional constraints of math and materials and logic, but their acceptance is constrained by social expectations. Christopher Alexander's The Timeless Way of Building described the perfection of use to which buildings could aspire, the way that people could make great buildings and inspirational spaces, places where people felt themselves and places where they felt alive. Project Utopia was about participatory design, and it happened around the introduction of early desktop layout technology. With the advent of this technology, editors began to tell typesetters how to do their jobs, and in response, they created this project that relied on cooperation between workers and technologists. They used experienced design methods and lo-fi prototypes to ascertain and improve future state that empowered the workers. In all of these examples, we see a concern for the social, a concern for the individual, and the concern for collaboration between stakeholders in a project. In 2008, IDEO's Tim Brown published a highly influential article on design thinking in the Harvard Business Review, as well as a popular industry book, Change by Design. Brown defined design thinking as a methodology that imbues the full spectrum of innovation activities with a human-centered design ethos. He went on to say, by this, I mean that innovation is possible through a thorough understanding, through direct observation of what people want and need in their lives. He also represented design thinking as a cycle of inspiration, ideation, and implementation made up of sub-cycles involving explorations of the design space, framework development, prototyping, evaluation, and dissemination of case knowledge to the rest of the business world. He defined 5 personality qualities of a design thinker: empathy, integrative thinking, optimism, experimentation, and collaboration. And 10 years later, there's still much debate about design thinking and its dissemination. And Harvard Business Review is still talking about it. So this article from last year, written by a professor of public policy at NYU, said, the criticisms are several, that design thinking is poorly defined. The case for its use relies more on anecdotes than data, that it is little more than basic common sense. Design thinking privileges the designer above the people she serves, and in doing so limits the participation in the design process. It limits the scope for truly innovative ideas and makes it hard to solve challenges that are characterized by a high degree of uncertainty. The author went on to say that design thinking bears an uncanny resemblance to an earlier model of problem solving celebrated in the 1970s and 80s for the superior solutions it was supposed to produce. This was the rational experimental approach to problem solving. It was a simplified version of a scientific method. Now, this author did not seem to be aware of the design method movement or the notion that design thinking is applied to wicked problems. Nor had she thought of the development of design thinking as a way to articulate design research that had impact in organizations throughout the world. Not just design, but businesses, governments, and other places. In my view, bringing design thinking to the larger world was one of the greatest things that Brown, IDEO, and Stanford did in the 2000s. Doing this required communicating the substance of design, making it accessible and persuasive, and most importantly, creating a rabid desire for design thinking among many audiences. So today, design thinking is a process of inventing a better world than we have now, a means for fostering a disciplined imagination that can be used to invent new products and services that are desirable, technically feasible, economically viable, and that realize a vision of a preferred future state. Implicit in this idea is understanding people and social, economic, and technological factors, imagining many possible futures, and making many things to understand which imagined future might be optimal. And so while design thinking has been great and has pushed the boundaries of what we do, I'm still thinking back to that conference and the things designers are working on. The question nagged at me, do we need something more than design thinking? What comes after design thinking? And what I think we need is a thoughtful engagement with design practice as it fits in the world today, taking into account history and subdisciplines and industry and academia alike. So I'm evolving this notion of design leadership to answer questions including, what do we need to learn to become designers in an increasingly complex and volatile era? I believe we need further design scholarship in today's society. This is for two reasons. First, designers need to contribute meaningfully to society. And second, I think we need to create a pipeline of design leadership for academia and the world. And both of these may involve radical change. One of my favorite examples of design that led to radical change is a paper from 2007 about accidental change at a Baptist church. Its title is Radical Change, Accidentally, the Emergence and Amplification of Small Change. I think it's a really nice example of design leadership. A white Baptist church sat in a largely Black community. The church's gates and doors were closed to residents of the neighborhood. A decision to offer breakfast to homeless people by a few members of the church led to radical change in the church and the surrounding environment. After the free breakfast began, doors were unlocked, the security system was dismantled, church offices were moved to the front of the building, and volunteer numbers grew. Parishioners offered free medical and dental services to members of the community. The membership of the church became more diverse. The iconography around the church changed as signage and values changed. At one point, the offensive signage was melted, made into a chalice, and carried to a neighboring Black church. The church was also declared a safe zone for the homeless to sleep. Theories of change were unable to explain how and why change emerged. The authors believed that because the change was unintended, emergent, and slow, because it occurred in destabilizing conditions, and that it was followed by subsequent actions, it thereby resulted in radical change. I like this case because the conditions around it neatly mirror the world that we live in. It is a microcosm of what our world has become today. As a stabilizing context sets the stage for the possibility of change. A high degree of tension means that connections between people and parts of the system tighten, and amplifying small changes becomes easy. A lack of equilibrium means that emergent self-organization is likely to occur. And in this context, novel changes are often more accepted and result in larger change. Continuous change, then, a dynamic interaction of contextual conditions, small change, and amplification creates a pattern of change that is radical and continuous. So I'm interested in figuring out how we can train designers to enact radical change in today's world. Students want to do this as they seek bigger and bigger problems of interest. What skills might we need to train students to do things like identifying problematic situations? This suggests that the designer's judgment plays a role in figuring out what to improve. To become conversant in ethics, this means a big turn in how we design and what we teach, especially in the face of abundant data and autonomous things. To position ourselves to do societal good, this means that we have to consider the application of our work, but also when it might fail. To train designers to have a career, not a vocation, not just a first job, because the field is dynamic and the jobs are changing very quickly. And then to consider what I describe as design as leadership, to look at design as an action of change, a social and collaborative process, moving to consensus and an improved future state. So now I want to just give a few examples from the kinds of things my lab has been working on recently. And you'll see that they're really not traditional interaction designs. They're very abstract. They're very large. They're very messy. So we're using some of these principles and ideas here. So some of our research applies design thinking to identifying and communicating algorithmic bias so that people working in high stakes, high bias decision-making contexts, such as in public services or social and human services or criminal justice or financial service or legal matters, make decisions about people that might have long implications into the future. So for example, recently on Twitter, the image cropping algorithm discriminated against black faces by focusing on white faces and cropping black ones. So you can see on the left, there's a joke. They're asking for an image of Barack Obama, and we get two images of Mitch McConnell. But then on the right-hand side, you can see what actually happened. There's a vision kind of image of Obama, and then we return the face of a white person. So this bias only surfaced after many Twitter users collectively detected and reported this issue. And this shows, for example, that while bias detection is essential, it cannot be relied on as the only method to inform decisions. So to mitigate this problem, we presented a three-stage design approach to increase bias awareness, which will inform users about potential biases an AI system might introduce to their decisions. In stage one, we involve the decision makers and those impacted in order to select an inference that has a potential for high reward and low harm. We treat this as a wicked problem that benefits from reframing, a process of searching for and comparing different solution goal pairings. Once we select that inference, we engage in a search for possible failures in the AI system and whether a failure could occur due to a potential bias. We engage the decision makers and the communities impacted to develop a failure definition and a bias definition. Only then do we use AI and machine learning to determine biases in new decision cases that are similar to the one we engaged the community on. In step three, we design and evaluate interfaces that surface the identified potential biases to decision makers. These interfaces communicate relevant aspects of the algorithmic performance, and they offer insights on how potential biases might impact the AI recommendation. So these tools allow stakeholders to explore the possible failures and biases, along with analytics to evaluate the trade-offs they need in making a final decision. So for example, this figure shows mock-ups that might be used by a hiring officer to review a list of candidates. The list could show candidates' racial makeup as well as supporting analytics, which might communicate algorithmic bias and help hiring officers carefully consider their own decisions. So for example, we could have a ranked list of candidates with scores and a threshold. We could have an unranked list of candidates with a score and a threshold. We could have an unranked list of candidates with no score, and we could just have a list of scored candidates. We also might include a badge indicating which people on these lists are minorities. So with these kinds of visualizations, it might be more helpful for hiring managers to make decisions that are not impacted by biases within the system. So the role of design in this work is a number of ways. First, problem reframing is used to get researchers, clients, and community stakeholders to consider different inferences and the implications of them, something that algorithmic systems don't really do beyond the execution of code. That's why we have mistakes like the Twitter problem. Second, we have an opportunity to do societal good by working with community offices and algorithm developers at the same time and developing optimal solutions for the community. And third, we're aiding all stakeholders in thinking about the implications of their design decisions. Another place that we are using design leadership is where we are preparing for a future of automation. So current research predicts that the hospitality industry will experience significant job shifts in the coming decades as a result of technological innovation. The hospitality sector is one that is very high risk to automation. We're already seeing innovations like self-service kiosks, applications of robotics, customer-facing AI, automated operations, and food preparation robots, among others. In the hospitality industry, automation had already eliminated a number of jobs and shifted other jobs. It created some new jobs through innovations around hotel check-in and cashiering. But after the pandemic, this sector was really hard hit and many, many people lost their jobs. And so now, between this reduced need and further shifting of hotel services, this is a drastic problem. So our design research seeks to collectively envision the impacts of technology innovations to give workers a chance to share in the prosperity of innovation and to provide the union with the knowledge that can be used at the bargaining table. So we're working with Unite here, the largest hospitality union in the U.S., and they have had a history of really negotiating bargaining agreements for their workers in the face of new technologies. And this collaboration creates a unique opportunity for innovation. We're trying to identify the challenges the hospitality workers are experiencing due to emerging technology. We're trying to educate the union about the pipeline of things that are coming. And we're using our design expertise to build a worker-centered strategy for future automation. So what we're designing is material that the union can negotiate with. So this work relies on design leadership in a number of ways. First, problem reframing is used to get researchers, union leaders, workers, and people at the bargaining table to recast the workers' presence in the future of automation. Second, we have an opportunity to do societal good by ensuring that union workers have a purposeful place in the workplace, both now and in the future. And third, the approach on this project has garnered attention from union leaders and lawyers, asserting the importance of design and the approach it offers for solving wicked problems. So being a designer starts right after the decision is made to become a designer. And today, what we're seeing is people are pushing the boundaries of design and working on more and more complex problems. I believe that design leadership should be a part of any designer's life. And I think that we need more work on what design and design education should be. So in my work, I want to improve the very nature of design itself. And I've tried to introduce some new ideas about the boundaries of design. My intention is to make design more systemic, holistic, and ethical in order to match the challenges and expectations of today, and to infuse these ideas in what we teach and what we do. We need more work on what design, designing, and design education should be today. And by understanding the ideals and pragmatics of our discipline, we can create better designers and design leaders going forward. Thank you for listening, and I hope you'll join me in this process. And I want to thank my collaborators and colleagues, without which this work would have been possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jodi. Now is the time for the Q&A. Look, I cannot agree more with you. Data, especially big data, machine learning and AI. On the other side, we have too much data. On the other side, we try to use machine learning and AI, try to provide a kind of solution to utilize the data for something good, and which is significantly impact the design and the design education eventually. So now we have a question here is, are the challenges of teaching design and design leadership any different now than what they were previously? So isn't design inherently challenging to teach by its nature anyway? Jodi.
Great question. So I'll address, is design inherently difficult to teach? Yes, I think so. I think that we are trying to cram more and more onto the designer's plate, not only understanding form, communication, and meaning, but now understanding data, ethics, AI, machine learning. And also I want to acknowledge that we're also teaching design to people that only have a small amount of time to learn design because they might be in a MBA program, they might be in a product management program, they might be in an HCI program. So it does become very difficult to distill what the right things are to teach designers. Another thing I want to comment on is that I think we're seeing a shortage of people rising up to leadership, to be department heads and deans in these design schools. And I think this is another problematic trend that maybe is something else that we should be teaching.
Exactly, exactly. Thank you, Jodi. You see, I really like the word you mentioned, incivility. So actually, the data, machine learning and AI, it's a new technology. It's brilliant. It's bringing new opportunities for our society. But at the same time, it's kind of causing difficulties like equilibrium issues of the society, ethical issues, and data privacy issues, how, et cetera, so many issues to our society. Now, the question is, do you see any changes of the role of designers compared to before? What will be the contributions of designers should do in such an era of AI?
Thank you. I think one of the things that designers have done for a long time is to facilitate a social and collaborative process of designing. And through the things they create, whether they're boundary objects or sketches or prototypes or products, they facilitate communication.
Yep.
And so I think these things are critically important in this time of fake news and incivility. And for example, in this work we're doing, the first project I described is with our local county's health and human service offices. And these people have to make decisions that are very impactful to families. For example, is somebody a bad parent and do we need to take their children away? So if we can communicate an understanding of all the things that are on the table relative to this decision, I think that we're using design in a very ethical way. Yet we're using skills that designers have had for decades, hundreds of years. Communication, transparency, creating boundary objects, reframing and letting people understand the problem in different ways.
Okay, thank you so much, Jodi. That was Professor Jodi FORLIZZI. Thank you so much.